Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to go through a live trade breakdown with you guys. I took this trade today during FOMC, and I'm going to go through what I saw in the volatility of the market, and then how I was able to utilize that to my advantage, as well as what I looked for on Bookmap through order flow and futures that allowed me to take this trade. I'll go through the entire breakdown with you guys, entries, exits, and yeah, exactly what I could have done better and what I did exactly correct and followed my trading plan. All right, guys, so first things first, I did trade this live in the Discord. We were on voice. Now, during days where we have an FOMC announcement, I don't trade the day before FOMC, and I don't trade until the announcement actually comes out. So I wasn't trading in the morning. I waited until the afternoon at 2 p.m. when the announcement was released, and then obviously when Powell comes on and speaks as well. Before that, I don't like to trade because usually the market's very volatile and choppy, and you always want to wait until the data and news comes out prior to taking an entry. So that's what I was waiting for. I waited until the data came out, and then I ended up taking this trade on SPX, traded it live on voice, and I was trading SPX puts. So we'll go through exactly how I scaled, how I entered, and then what my profit targets were and how I scaled out. So my trading plan was SPX puts below 5,600. So if you look at SPX here, SPX had 5,600 was SPX's low of day. So you can see that we ended up kind of making a choppy move up. There was some news from Trump that came out around this time, and the market dropped, and then it created a base of support at 5,600, which was the low of day. So that was the safest entry on SPX to take. Now, if we go ahead and look at futures at the same time, right before the announcement was at 11 a.m. Eastern time, so 2 p.m. Pacific, or 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern. So right around here, NASDAQ had a downwards trend line that it was holding. So one touch, this is a swing high, 1-2 touch trend line, even right here, rejected the trend line before breaking it. So NASDAQ was in a downtrend off of the trend line rejection, and then ES here had created a base of support and low of day at 5620. So I wanted to see ES clear 5620 and the NASDAQ to clear this 19,800 level, which was its low of day and base of support. My targets on the downside below 5600 on SPX were 5580 and then 5569, where it had a gap. It had a gap from 5580 into 5569, which ended up being my second profit target that it didn't end up getting to, but no worries, I'll show you guys exactly how I scaled out. So one thing I do want to show you before I go into my entries and exits is exactly what I was looking for and looking at on Bookmap. Bookmap has been a really key factor of my trading plan, especially with my entries, exits, and profit targets, which is basically my entire trading plan. Especially when I'm focused on SPX, SPY, and then I pay attention to futures as well. Really, with any ticker that you're trading, you want to pay attention to futures. So specifically ES futures, when you're trading SPY and SPX, we can see that ES before the data came out, so this was when the liquidity kind of went away right before the data was coming out at 2 p.m. We can see that it was kind of trading in a range here, lots of sellers sitting, lots of buyers sitting, but a main level you can see here is 5620 here. So that 5620 is the low of day, like I mentioned, for ES from today that I was waiting for it to break to take SPX puts, and you can see that there are significant buyers sitting. So you see a wall at 5620. So what does that tell us? If we are looking to take a trade on SPY or SPX, pretty much anything in the market, especially SPY and SPX, you want to make sure that ES is able to clear this 5620 wall of buyers before you end up entering puts. So it should fill the orders here at 5620. Sellers should still be aggressive as it fills those orders before you take entry. The data came out at 2 p.m. This is the 2 p.m. candle here. You can see there's a little bit of indecision on the NASDAQ here on this 2 p.m. candle, was holding this 19,800 level, and same thing with ES. If we go ahead and look, ES was also holding 5620, but ES was trending under its VWAP, as was the NASDAQ, and ES on this 5-minute candle rejected VWAP, which is a good sign. So as ES rejected VWAP here, you can see on the next candle, we ended up breaking 5620, and the NASDAQ also cleared my level of 19,800. So perfect. Both futures are in sync with one another, and both futures have broken their levels of support. Now, if we go ahead and look at SPX, I entered SPX puts at 1106. So this candle here, once it cleared 5600, let me just extend this so you guys can see. So if we go ahead and look at SPX, SPX cleared 5600 at 1106. This was the 11 o'clock candles So on futures, this was the 11 o'clock to 11:05 candle. This was the 11:06 candle on SPX that broke 5,600. This was my entry point on SPX. I entered once it broke 5,600, with my first target being 55.80. Now, when I have multiple profit targets, I always scale out 80% at my first profit target and then 10 and 10, depending on how many profit targets I had. So I ended up entering SPX puts 5,600 strike at 11:06 as it broke 5,600. And my first target, like I said, was 55.80, which I would take 80% off. I scaled out 80% at 11:08. 2 minutes later, it pushed into that 55.80 level towards the end of this candle here. And then we can see that it created a base of support. Now, my stop on what I had left on SPX, which was 20%, was 55.95. You can see that it went back and retested. And then around this time is when Powell started speaking. So Powell started speaking at 2:30. He was actually coming on. Before that was just the announcement. So once Powell started speaking, you can see that the market ended up pulling back and reversing. So I ended up exiting my SPX runners at 11:27. Once this candle broke and held above 55.95, which is what I usually wait for when I'm looking for my stop loss to hit. So I ended up exiting my runners at 55.95. Now, I do want to say that I did lock in $18,000 on this trade, and the runners did end up being red. However, because I locked 80% of my position, even though my runners ended up being red, I still was really profitable on this trade. Now, that's why it's so important to make sure that you are scaling out properly. I always recommend if you have less than 7 contracts trading SPY or SPX, especially 0 DTE, you should not be scaling out. If you have over 7 contracts or more, at that point, you're able to scale out 80% of your position or 90% of your position and not have your runners take up so much of your profit. So I always recommend at least trading 7 contracts or more to be able to scale out. At the peak of the premium, I entered the premium at around $24. It went up to around $33 at the premium peak, and then my runners ended up being at a loss of around $21, so a $2 loss to the downside. At the peak of the premium, I was up around $24,000, but I was willing to risk some of that position to be able to see if the stock would continue to, if the market would continue to sell down, which it didn't end up selling down. I can't show you guys my TRADERSYNC right now because it's the same day. It won't post until tomorrow, but if it does post, I will go ahead and show you guys. But this is what I ended up locking in. So I was comfortable holding those runners, even if they went to negative, because I was still going to have a decent amount of my profit locked in at that point. So you have to make sure that when you are scaling out properly and you are scaling out with the correct number of contracts. If you're only trading 3 contracts, it's not really ideal for you to scale out 2 contracts. You're still holding 33% of your position, which is a big chunk of your position. And trading 0 DTE, if it does end up reversing or pulling back, it could take up a lot, if not all, of your profit on the day. So it's definitely really important to understand how to scale out properly. And I will tell you guys, on ES futures, my target to the downside below 56.20 was 5,600. So if we go, and the target on the NASDAQ below 19,800 was 19,700. And if we look at the NASDAQ, you can see that neither of these candles held below 19,700. And if you look at the ES, you can see that neither of these candles held below 5,600. How did I determine that 5,600 was a profit target on ES? Well, one, it is a significant level of support and resistance. It is a psychological level, so it's usually a level that tends to hold. And then on top of that, what confirmed my levels is Bookmap. Now, if we look at Bookmap, you can see that at this point right here is where ES cleared the wall of buyers sitting at 56.20. So you can see that it ended up filling those orders. Big sellers stepping in on ES. Both of these orders right here, big sell orders coming in. It cleared the 56.20 level. And if we look down, ES really didn't have any significant walls. That had a little bit of a wall here at 56.07, but really the biggest wall here you can see is sitting at 5,600. So that was why 5,600 on ES was my final profit target, because it did have a significant wall of buyers sitting at that level. So we would need a lot more volume to come in for it to be able to actually clear that wall. Similar to how we needed the volume to come in for it to be able to clear 56.20. Volume came in when the news came in. So at this point, this was around the time when Powell was coming on. We would need another another piece of significant data to come in for the market to move, which would have been what Powell said. And unfortunately, when Powell got on, the market ended up pushing. So we weren't able to clear 5,600 on ES at that point. And if we look here again, you can see that later it did try to clear that 5,600, which is why you see the low of day become 55.96. So when it did clear the orders here, it filled the orders, you can see that heavy selling pressure didn't come in at that point. Heavy sellers didn't step in at that point, versus if you look here, when it cleared 56.20, you still saw big sell orders come in. Not a lot of buyers stepping in, but big sell orders coming in. Versus here, you only saw a little bit, and then the market ended up taking over. Buyers ended up taking over on ES, and we ended up reversing to the upside. So it's really important to pay attention to significant levels and significant areas on Bookmap. And if you look at ES here, this right around here is where ES rejected its VWAP. Okay, so if we look at the chart, this was the 56.40 level. ES was sitting at 56.40 at that time. Look at this on ES, 56.40, wall of sellers, not able to clear the wall to the upside. We don't have significant buyers stepping in to be able to clear that wall. Sellers take back over here, and you can see straight trend down on ES until it gets to its next significant wall, 56.07 and 5600. Once it cleared right here, you can see a big order of sellers come in at 56.20, low of day, but overall nice trend down on Bookmap that confirms that the trend is indeed a downtrend, and sellers are indeed in control of ES futures, which then pushes SPY and SPX as well. So it's really, really important to pay attention to your levels on Bookmap. Pay attention to order flow, whether you're using Bookmap, Level 2, or Times and Sales. It really has been a game changer for me, especially when I'm looking for target profits on futures to know when to scale out and when to take majority of my profit. Also, I do just want to show you guys right around here when we did pull back on ES, once it cleared 56.20 right here, and we did pull back here, you don't see a lot of heavy sellers or heavy buyers stepping in. But even if you did, what you want to pay attention to is where's the pullback level at. Obviously, you have levels of resistance and support on your chart. So my stop loss on SPX was 55.95, which it did pull back to that level. You also want to pay attention to future Bookmap, because when it is in a downtrend like this on Bookmap and you see order flow is moving in one direction, and you see, let's say for this specific example, sellers are in control of this position, you can see that once it did clear and it was approaching this next level of 5600 here, when it did pull back at this specific point here, it had a level where sellers were sitting. Okay, so you see this level here at 56.15, so that tells you that that's the retest level on this specific play. Ended up not able to fully clear 56.15, sellers stepped back in and retested that 5600, clearing before we ended up bouncing before Powell stepped in. All right, guys, so hopefully this breakdown was helpful in how I utilize futures to trade SPX and SPY, and then also how I implement Bookmap into every trade that I take. I watch Bookmap the way that I showed you guys every single day. Every trade that I take, whether I'm trading Tesla, whether I'm trading Nvidia, Apple, or SPY and SPX, QQQ, you can actually watch SPY and QQQ on Bookmap. You just can't watch SPX because it doesn't have any volume, but it's really easy to follow along Bookmap watching futures to be able to take trades either on futures or with any other ticker that you're trading.